and to be able to stand up there with those who are the really smart ones and say, I'm one of them. Right. Now, we must also establish the doctrinal backgrounds of those involved, as this has a direct bearing on the text likely to be chosen. We call this the morality method. Right. And it has to do with where the person actually stands in their relationship to God, as well as in their relationship to man. So we've got these 8 methods. So now we must look at the matter of the original texts themselves. Both Hebrew and Greek originals, as far as we know, no longer exist. In fact, we only have copies of copies which were themselves copies of copies. It's clear, therefore, that there are no available original texts to guarantee us the correct text. But let's just, to finish this lesson off, let's just visit again this matter of the scriptures being copied and still retaining their inherent inspiration, inerrancy and infallibility. We've already looked, when we looked at this question of can we copy the scriptures and still retain the inspiration, inerrancy and infallibility, we looked at the 10 Commandments written on the 2 tables of stone and placed in the Ark of the Covenant. The ones that were placed in the Ark of the Covenant were copies of the original. Exodus 25:16 tells us, and Deuteronomy 10:5. But then we know that Moses put a copy of the ceremonial law in a pocket on the side of the Ark of the Covenant, Deuteronomy 31:24-26. Also, we notice in Joshua, and Joshua 1:8 begins to tell us about this, God told Joshua to make copies of the law, and Joshua did. He was also to make copies of it on stone and other copies as time went on. And he had these copies put in various places, and the book of Joshua tells us several times that Joshua copied the law. And then Moses left instructions with the children of Israel that when they made themselves a king, this was to be in the future. He looked ahead and he said, the time's going to come when you're going to have a king, and I've got instructions for that king. He was to have a copy of the law on hand at all times, and he was to read it every day. He was to have it by his side at all times, a copy of the law. And then look at Jesus in his earthly ministry. Luke 4:16-21, we'll just read that. Luke 4:16-21 says, and he, this is Jesus, came to Nazareth, where he'd been brought up, and as his custom was, he went into the synagogue on the Sabbath day and stood up for to read. And there was delivered unto him the book of the prophet Isaiah. That's Isaiah. And when he had opened the book, he found the place where it was written, the Spirit of the Lord is upon me, because he hath anointed me to preach the gospel to the poor. He hath sent me to heal the brokenhearted, to preach deliverance to the captives, and the recovering of sight to the blind, to set at liberty them that are bruised, to preach the acceptable year of the Lord. And he closed the book, and he gave it again to the minister, and sat down, and the eyes of all them that were in the synagogue were fastened on him. And he began to say unto them, this day is this scripture fulfilled in your ears. Now that's very interesting. Jesus read from the book of the law. It would have been a scroll. And he read from the book of Isaiah. And he said, this day is this scripture fulfilled in your ears. Now, Jesus said that what he had read was scripture, and Paul tells us in 2 Timothy 3:16, all scripture is given by inspiration of God. And yet, the actual scroll that Jesus read from was just one of the many hundreds of copies in Israel, which were all copies of copies, and none were originals, as the original had long since been lost. Isaiah wrote this a long time before, and the original had long since been lost. Jesus read from a copy, and he said that it was scripture. And the scriptures tell us that all scripture is given by inspiration of God. So we can be confident that as long as a copy is true and accurate, we haven't got a problem with copying, right? If in regard to the Old Testament, we accept the Jews as the custodians of the Scriptures, the issue of the correct text is easily solved for the Old Testament and the New Testament. The Jews worldwide have preserved the Scripture of the Old Testament, and the text used is the Masoretic text. When the Masoretic text is referenced to the available text of the New Testament, it clearly leads us to the received text. We call that Textus Receptus, TR, or the Byzantine text or the Syrian text. It's all the same thing. In the past, this matter of referencing the Old Testament Masoretic text to the New Testament manuscripts available was considered enough evidence to settle this matter. Right, and we'll leave it there, and we'll come back and we'll begin the next one by asking ourselves, why then, when it is so obvious that these two texts are the correct text, is there a controversy about this matter, and why have other New Testament texts been substituted for the received text?